Welcome to Keeping It Real, the largest podcast made by real estate agents and for real estate agents. My name is DJ Paris. I am your guide and host through the show. And today is our regular series called Fireside Chat with Facebook. Now, we have teamed up with the real estate team at Facebook to produce episodes designed to help real estate agents better utilize Facebook and their suite of tools like Instagram, WhatsApp. And we have Scott Shapiro from Facebook Corporate with us as our guest. Let me tell you a little bit about Scott. Scott Shapiro is a senior client partner on the real estate team at Facebook, where he focuses on engaging with key clients and their ecosystem partners to develop marketing solutions and strategies to drive their businesses forward. In addition to the client partner role, Scott also serves as the industry relations liaison between the Facebook real estate sales team and the real estate industry, helping to educate agents, brokers, and leaders on Facebook's platforms and best practices. Prior to joining Facebook, Scott was a sales executive at ABC, where he also participated in a sales advisory role, acting as a consultant for the digital and the sports teams. Scott, welcome back to Keeping It Real and our fireside chat with Facebook.
Thanks, CJ. It's funny, as you're reading all that, I'm like, wow, that's lengthy. I might have to give you a new edited version to cut that down.
I think it's really important
for the team.
Well, I think it's important for people to hear your background. And, you know, you had a career prior to Facebook. We were just talking offline where today we're going to be talking about stories and across the Facebook suite of tools. And we were Scott was mentioning that ESPN uses stories and most brands do. And so he was actually even referencing some previous work around it. Yeah. So I think it's important for people to know where you come from and who you are. But most importantly, I think it's just amazing that Facebook also has a real estate division and a department specifically around helping agents better use the tools and platform.
Yeah, no, it's been great. We're about 3 years old. So, it's been a journey. And I think, outreach such as what we're doing through the podcast and through the Facebook Lives, it's really important because I think we've talked about this in the past, that there are a lot of sources of truth when it comes to our platform, but it's really hard to understand, what is the source of truth. And so we want to be a little bit more on our front foot, out in front of things and in front of topics and talking to agents and talking to brokers. Always appreciate the time and the platform that you give us, DJ, because it allows us to really, hopefully, drive impact for the folks who are using our platforms and really demystify some of what you should or shouldn't do, and or really point out the things that are coming up, such as stories, which is, when you and I aligned on, what's a really interesting topic. It's this one because it's really a monster consumer trend. And as we think about, how best to drive impact, well, you want to be where your consumers are. So looking forward to having a good chat with you over the next 45 minutes or so.
Yeah, and I want to also let the listeners know that if you're not a consumer of Facebook or Instagram stories, I wasn't either until more recently, where I started noticing people that I follow were starting to create more content in their stories, within Facebook and Instagram. And so I said, I always thought, stories are just for younger account holders or account users. And I thought, I'll check out to see what it is. And I'm actually have become a bit, I don't want to say addicted isn't the right word, but I've actually become now accustomed to looking at stories even before I now scroll in my feeds. I don't know if that's a common trend or not, but because I think it's quick, it's easy, it's digestible, it disappears. There's an urgency to it. There's an easy to consume aspect of it. And I like it because it sort of in some ways does a little bit of the work for me, where I'm just able to see it, go on to the next one, and I'm kind of hooked on them now. So, and I'm a recent convert to stories.
Well, I think a couple of things, and we'll get into this. One, to your point, they're short, so it's a snackable moment of content. There are over 1 billion stories shared across our family of apps and services every day.
Yeah, 1 billion. That's an amazing.
So, right. So like, you think about it, you and I are, and a lot of the audience, if you're using stories as a platform, we're in a very large bucket of people who agree. And I think, frankly, we're also seeing that brands benefit, and we'll get into some stats about putting your brand front and center in stories is a really great experience to drive awareness, to drive intent, and brand loyalty. So, if we think about you as a CEO and the CMO of your business, that's an interesting place to do so.
And I almost think too, just before we get to we get
Mhm.
actually into it, I think stories from a content creation perspective are actually a lot. It's a lot simpler of a process. Now you might spend more time
Yes.
actually crafting a story than you would a regular post, but I actually think it's now number one, it's easier to consume once it's posted, but I actually think it's easier to create. And you're doing that thing that marketers know every brand needs to do, which is consistently, touch your client. And you can touch them
Hmm.
in very short, simple, easy to create, easy to consume ways. And you don't have to worry as much about engagement. You don't have to worry as much
Yes.
about how many likes or comments, because you're just putting this digestible piece of content. You can do it multiple times a day if you want, and people do look at these. I know I do. I'm
Hmm.
looking at stories from people where if I saw a post of theirs, I might not actually read it. I might scroll
Hmm.
past. The way that stories is aligned is now I do see it, and I can always skip if
Hmm.
I want to, but it's so quick and easy. It makes it easy to actually digest other people's content. So I think it's a win in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
What we're actually going to do, and I want our listeners to pay special attention to this. We are actually going to be showing a PowerPoint presentation. So we're going to be going over slides, but don't worry if you're listening. We're going to be describing these slides in detail, but I will encourage everyone that is listening that would like to see the presentation to go to our Facebook page. Speaking of Facebook, visit us on Facebook, which is facebook.com/keeping it real pod. And you'll actually see the live Facebook live video we did. We'll also create this into a YouTube video as well. So if you're listening to this on your podcast app, just look in the notes. You should see a link in there for the YouTube link or the Facebook link as well. So anyway, should I go ahead and pull up our presentation?
Sure. Let's go for
Great.
it.
I shouldn't say it's not my presentation. I could
Yeah.
never make something look this beautiful. So I encourage everyone to see what a really nice looking presentation does or looks like, to also watch the video. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Pardon us
Awesome.
for a second while we do this.
Technology is always fun.
Yeah.
And there we go.
Okay. Well, Scott, take it
Awesome.
away.
Sure. So why don't we go on to the very first slide after our title slide? We have people on a slide looking very happy. So we have a phrase that stories can do it. And what that means is that it really harnesses the power of a cultural phenomenon, but it achieves business results. So I think the way to think about this is um, consumers always go ahead of brands and dictate trends. And so consumers, and the fact that they adopted so quickly to these platforms, first through Instagram, and now if you think about stories across the spectrum of all of our apps and services, stories are really our headline product. So think about it when you open up Facebook or Instagram or Messenger. Stories is actually the first thing you see top of the fold. So DJ is showing a really interesting slide here where we went from a horizontal world in the prior, the laptop big screen. And now the next slide DJ is going to show is how you can take that same image and put it into your phone. And the thing that's so interesting, and we were talking about it the other day internally, is phones are getting bigger again, right? We're getting into phablets. And a lot of this is, the content is really designed to build and to be full screen. And in our environments, they're the first thing you see. So when you open any of our apps, think about what you see across the very, very top. It's stories, whether it's on Facebook, Instagram, Messenger. So again, we're leading with it because we see that that's what consumers want to digest.
Yeah, I remember, it's funny, we're now filming things in particular for products like stories and whether it's
Mhm.
Instagram, Facebook, Messenger, WhatsApp. But what's interesting is we're now keeping our phones in the portrait mode, which is what Scott's mentioning, the up and down
Yeah.
mode versus the landscape mode, which, if you're creating content for YouTube, you're likely going to want it to be landscape because that's their native format. But
Mhm.
with stories, what's really cool is you don't have to worry so much about that because, and we're going to look at some statistics in a minute, there's actually a reason why you don't have
Yeah.
to turn your phone, in landscape to be able to consume stories or create them.
Yeah. It's also interesting, DJ, as you're talking, the stat here for people on the podcast side is that 82% of visitors to video-centric websites actually hold their smartphone in portrait orientation. It's just natural. I mean, the phone, the way we work with it, the way the apps are put together, you really hold it in that orientation. And stories, what it does is it fulfills that. So the beautiful thing, and there's no pun intended in what I'm going to say, it fills the real estate of these bigger, beautiful phones. You have the screen area. You have this real wonderful real estate to tell a story, to tell a message to the consumer. So why not take advantage of it? I think there's a sea change that we hope to see happen, and I think it will in real estate, where most of us pull off the MLS and it's a horizontal picture of the front of the house, and that's the listing we've traditionally advertised. And I think we at Facebook and Instagram in particular, we're thinking about it with our creative shop. How do we transition into the home can still be shown, but shown vertically versus horizontally, which is that orientation of what the consumer expects and wants to see.
It's a really important point and I know I don't want to spend too much time talking about this because I'm so interested in this. I could talk about this particular thing. Part of it all day is the orientation of the phone, but you're absolutely right. I'm thinking now about how I use my phone, and the only time I turn it to landscape mode is if I'm watching a longer form video on YouTube. Yep. But you're right. If I'm on Facebook, if I'm on Instagram, or if I'm just on any other app or website, even if it's a video, unless it forces me to turn it, I'm probably going to want to keep that portrait orientation. So that's really important. Is Facebook has basically looked at the usability of their products and how do people actually use these. So that brings up a great question: is our real estate photography, are they going to adjust as well? And then we now know they're mostly in landscape mode, real estate professional photos, but maybe it does make sense to also get portrait mode done for things like this. So
I hope they do. I think we empirically feel that if we're going to serve the industry, so if you're listing on the MLS and how you shoot the home, you want to mirror the use of where the consumer is. So I think hopefully we will see that kind of adaptation, and you showed it in the first two slides. And for people on the podcast, the slides that DJ showed were a laptop and an image in the laptop, horizontal landscape mode, and then showing that same image, but just zoomed in, showing it in the vertical mode, filling an entire smartphone screen. So we do as an industry need to migrate and make that change, because again, I think consumers expect it, and so you want to meet the consumer where they are with how you interpret the experience for them.
Absolutely. I think we're so used to also assuming that we know how consumers use their phone, and just the fact that 82.5% of visitors to video centric websites are keeping it in that portrait mode is an amazing statistic, which is why I keep getting stuck on it, because I'm amazed by that. But as I think back, I'm like, oh, that actually does make sense, because that's how I use it as well. So
absolutely. So a couple of things I think that's really important, and I think these are not surprising statistics. So again, for folks on the podcast versus the Facebook Live, we're looking at a slide that's talking about growing up in a mobile first world. I'm the proud dad of a Gen Z, soon to be 14-year-old. But if we look at stats, 28% of millennials are smartphone only internet users. I think
which means that means they're not using computers. They're strictly using their mobile devices. Got it.
That is correct. And I think, again, in some of the things that I've talked to people about in the industry and conversations I've had, again, think about the biggest phone releases that are coming. I mean, my wife hates to hear this because I keep kind of like knocking on the door. I'm like, Samsung released that Note Ultra 20 7-inch screen, 7-inch screen, right? And that's because, we're doing more with our phones, both from a productivity perspective and from a consumption perspective. So 28% of millennials are only smartphone internet users, but here's where this is really interesting. While they're young, while they're not ready to buy property today, they will be the next generation of home buyers. It's Gen Z, and 55% of them say they spend more than 5 hours a day on their mobile devices. So think about this. We've migrated away. COVID, I think, will impact some of the stats we're seeing. I think obviously with shelter in place and working from home, we're spending more time on the laptop right now. But I think, again, coming out of this, we still use our phones a ton. We still, it's funny, we put down the laptop or we have the laptop on the couch and we're working, and yet we still pick up our cell phone. So just again, a lot of the core through line of the things that DJ and I talk about are mobile first applications and environments, and stories is one. And I think, again, that's why you see huge consumption numbers by consumers, because again, they're just using their phone and it needs to be in that native device. Similarly to when, if we think about a TV, right? I mean, the reason I'm a huge sports fan, as you guys can see, if you're watching on FB Live behind me, I've got a bunch of sports memorabilia. We shoot that in a more horizontal mode. That's how we consume it on that device. Flip that, we consume content in a vertical world on the cell phone.
Yeah, I've noticed this too with younger people, especially younger children, teenagers as well, is they favor their mobile devices over their laptop component counterparts. And I was always like, I wonder why that's happening. And it actually reminds me of a funny Facebook story this is something that just popped into my mind. But years ago, I remember Mark Zuckerberg relayed the story where I think he was going around the country visiting. I think he was visiting schools, or he was visiting a school, and he asked them about email, and they said, we don't like to use email because it's too slow. And I remember he
Yeah.
said, too slow, email's pretty instant. He's like, and they said, no, it's too slow for us. We need a faster component, which is where messaging really,
Yes.
he really put more focus into that. And we all now know, email is slower than text messaging. And it's not particularly slower, but it's now just part of our the way we use our devices. Is we don't email as much. We use Facebook Messenger, we use text, we use some of the other messaging platforms,
Yeah.
and that's how we communicate now. And also, our phones are faster than us going to our computer because we always have
Absolutely.
our phones on us.
And the processing speeds of the phones have gotten
Yeah,
better. So
it's amazing.
it's technology keeping up with but that comes back to the original point, and where it ties in to the through line on stories is, yes, it's a cultural phenomenon, and that's because, again, the consumer got there first. So the
Right.
consumer decides, right, what we want. From technology back in, I'm a child of the 80s. Beta versus VCR. The consumer bought VCR,
Sure.
so the VCR won. Um, you know, high def DVRs versus Blu-rays, things of that nature. So
Sure.
again, you go to where the consumer is. We're showing a bunch of different screens for folks on the podcast, but the combination here is a messaging brands on the page versus like people. And so again, people use stories, but brands use stories, and that's really, I think, if we're going to take a step back, where real estate agents and brokerages have a wonderful opportunity. There's a great opportunity, I think, to meet people more in this platform than people do. And DJ and I are going to kind of unpack that a little bit more. But I think that's teasing out that if you're not doing stories at a high rate and reaching consumers both organically and paid, you're missing out on how and where your consumers spending their time.
That's very true. And I, as just myself now, I have a lot of real estate agents that I have that I follow. We have 700 real estate agents at our own company. We've got more than over 20,000 people that really are regular listeners to the show. Almost all of them are real estate agents. A lot of them we have followed each other. And I actually now thinking I don't see as many real estate agents utilizing stories as much on either platform, Instagram or Facebook. And so this is a huge opportunity for our listeners to start reaching their audience, because like I said, I'm the guy who's now spending time on stories, and I'm not even seeing much real estate content on there. So
yeah, we're going to dive into some things that people should know about when they think about stories, partners, technical partners, advertising. That goes back a couple of weeks to how we talked about partners, DJ.
sure.
What makes a story? Obviously, the orientation. We've talked about that, the vertical nature of it. We call this stitching, putting different components together. So static image, video, short form, right? It's 15 seconds on a video, which is great. That's what we would recommend for feed videos. So like we talk a lot about for real estate agents, don't make the 5-minute long drone footage to think that it's going to work in feed. Same as stories. There's a reason why we cap it at 15 seconds. That's what the consumer is looking for. And then using creative tools natively, whether they live natively from an organic perspective, that you can bring your brand to life and your brand is yourself or the property. And then in the advertising space, a lot of the tools are starting to think about overlays and ways to make the story a little bit more engaging. So just thinking through those three things kind of facilitates the story's narrative. So let's move forward, DJ. So there are a couple of things, again, so if we go back to why is this a consumer phenomenon? Why does this matter for my real estate business? There are a couple of things that we're going to walk you through, again, for folks on the podcast versus on the live stream. There's 6 things that we talk through. First, it's full screen. We've kind of hit that over and over, but it's immersive. So that's one of the big things. Why full screen matters, it's immersive. It's ephemeral. DJ talked about that just off camera with me, where we were talking about the fact that it is, it's kind of in the moment, and it has some fun, it has a little bit of a playful nature. It doesn't need to live forever. I had a friend, a fellow Facebook employee who had a baby. Actually, he and his wife both work at Facebook. And the more fun, ephemeral moments of their daughter's birth are in stories. The more legacy, long-term things that they want to go back to, a little bit more formal, are back in news feeds. So a little bit of a different use case. They're fast. We've already talked about that. I'm not, as you guys know, if you've listened to a couple of our episodes. Brevity is not my key strength, but stories it is. They're fun. They can be fun. You don't have to consistently be so serious. They have a little bit of that playful nature to them. They're in the moment. So again, because they're ephemeral, you should think about this. We're trying to tell a story that's very relevant to today. And then the last thing is they're engaging and they're interactive. So again, whether you're on the live stream and you can see these 6 points, or through the podcast, just think of it as, it's full screen, it's ephemeral, it's fast, it's playful, it's in the moment, and it's interactive.
And a lot less people, a lot less agents are utilizing it right now. So it is a wide open space to where you can then make your voice be heard in these short, bite-sized, fun, and engaging ways.
Absolutely. So there's a couple of reasons why content, people prefer, stories over feed. This is based on some information that our Facebook IQ team, our research team, put together some studies. And this is back in late 2018. So a little, the information is a little bit dated, but still relevant to the story. No pun intended. Again, it's, stories provide information on things I care about, information on events. So if we think about, the world about, open homes, and whether that is a virtual open home, which we touched on a couple of weeks ago, or an in-person when shelter in place is hopefully behind us, its relevancy, and that goes back to, again, to that fun, ephemeral, quick point. It's in the moment. Some people like it for celebrities. Again, I think if we're thinking about the real estate case here, I think it's, your service becomes sort of your personality. I think when we're talking about most forms of advertising in real estate, the traditional way of pulling the listing in, it's only the listing, here you can add your own voice, you can add your own character, your own expertise. What's happening in the community? What are the things that you know about? Why should people trust you over maybe somebody who they haven't heard from? Remember, one of the stats DJ and I reviewed a couple of weeks ago is that over 50% of consumers go with the first agent that they have a conversation with. So a way to have a conversation, at least an introductory conversation, is using stories, having a little bit of fun, showing your expertise. And again, it allows for people to see from brands that they want to hear from. So again, I think breaking through, especially on the advertising side, to DJ's point, agents in particular are not using stories as much as I think the other types of business, small businesses even are. And so it's a wonderful place to kind of stand out, stand apart, and kind of build your own brand in addition to the listing you may have.
I have a quick little pro tip for everyone who's a real estate agent listening who is thinking about what kind of content should, and I'm certainly, that could be a whole year-long conversation about what type of content to put in stories, but I'll show you, I want to just to reveal one that I've noticed that agents, I mentioned I haven't seen a lot of real estate specific content or realtor specific content on stories, but I have seen some, and I've noticed that I think this is a very effective little tidbit that it certainly works on me. So we know that real estate agents oftentimes work nights and weekends, right? Because people oftentimes work during the day. They're only available to go see properties or do real estate stuff in the evenings and on the weekends. And what I've noticed is a lot of the people I do follow, when they do post, they post a lot of times after hours. So they might be posting in the evening. And what they'll do is they'll take a picture of themselves in a car, then might say something like, on my way to show my client a home, or or a Saturday morning, just heading to the office, or have 4 showings today. And I used to, when I first started looking at stories, I was kind of like, I don't really care about what they're doing in their day. And now that but I'm not a consumer. I mean, I'm in the industry. And now that I'm thinking about it, it's actually a brilliant thing to do, because it lets people know that you're working, and it lets people know how dedicated you are to your business. So if you're wondering, what should I post about? I don't know that all your content should be, here's what I'm doing at 6:45 in the evening for my client. But, it's not a terrible idea. And if we're wanting to think about branding, is think about what kind of, what do you want your image to be? What do you want to, to show on social media about how dedicated you are to your business? And stories are a great way to do that, because you can do these little bite-sized things. Oop, just wrapped up my last showing of the day. It's 10 o'clock. I'm going home. That has an impact on the people following. Like, wow, this person is really working for their client. So just a little tip there.
I think the other thing, and as we move to the next slide, DJ, I think bouncing on top of that, there are a couple of things. One, I think you can also highlight your local community. So one of the things that we've talked a lot about from the Facebook and Instagram perspective over the last couple of months during COVID is, the brand, showing brand care, showing community care. These are things that people are thirsting for and yearning for. As businesses reopen, as businesses are looking for people to get back out, especially, if we think about people in the service industry, our restaurants, our bars, our coffee shops, our small theaters, our small community theaters, our small stores on Main Street.
Yeah.
It's another really great way of showing your authenticity, showing off more than just a listing, and giving yourself a little bit more of, frankly, your own brand and your own voice about what you know about your community, into these interactions with the consumer, because it's so much more, and will be, and it has been, but even more so now, so much more than just the listing. It's what do you know about your town that maybe I don't, or your neighborhood, or the events going on. So it's important. And on the screen, actually, and it's a perfect segue, is across the Facebook family of apps, 1 billion stories are shared each and every day. So if we think about this, it's another great opportunity to kind of spawn virality and, sharing, people in your sphere, using it as an advertising medium, using it as an organic medium. And again, just, people like to share that content. So I think you can show more of who you are and who your community is. It's, I always think about it, what's beyond the listing?
Right.
Your expertise, your services. How do our platforms mirror that? So I think it's just a really great way of connecting those two dots.
And real quickly too, I also, to touch on Scott's point about highlighting local businesses, real estate, of course, is a hyper-local industry, and agents are usually hyper-local as well. And what an amazing opportunity right now, as you're visiting these local businesses that are still open, or maybe they're looking for work, or they just want to, let people know that they're still around. And right now in Chicago, sadly, we have a lot of businesses that are boarded up that aren't closed, but because we've had some unrest here, a lot of businesses appear to be closed. And I was just thinking I'll be heading to my dry cleaner later today to pick up a suit, and it looks like they're closed. They are not closed. And what an easy, simple thing for me to take a screenshot or take a picture with them and say, hey, for everyone here in River North, this cleaners is still open, and tag them. They would be thrilled to do that. And that's a great way to. So if you're looking for content, that's another amazing opportunity right now, is highlight and support those local businesses through stories.
Absolutely. All right, so moving on. So one of the things that I think is really important is, and I think agents are much more aware of this as we've been out more and more in the industry, but it's not just Facebook. It's how do you think about Facebook Messenger and Instagram together? WhatsApp is a little bit still, a different type of a platform and environment, but how do you think about all of those together? We have, for stories, over 500 million daily active users across our platform. So the reason I think that that's so important is, again, when we want to reach the consumer, we advertise and we market ourselves because we want to reach the consumer and influence them. So again, it's thinking about, where are they spending their time? You want to be part of that conversation. And so, thinking through, taking a step back for a moment, just really fast before we move on too far, is, we talked a couple of weeks ago about partners. We talked about brokerages working really collaboratively with us on paid tools. A lot of them have something called automatic placements. Automatic placements allows your advertising to get into stories. You should ask, if you're interviewing a third party, let's say you don't have, you don't work at a brokerage that is Realogy or Keller Williams or whatnot, and you look at a third party, ask them, will my advertising be on stories? And stories across all of Facebook's platforms, not just Instagram, not just Facebook, and not just Messenger. DJ and I were talking before we came on air about, let machine learning determine which stories environment you go to, right? Instead of saying, well, it's only an Instagram thing or it's only a Facebook thing, Your consumers might be across different forms, different age groups, different things, but they're still in stories. So let those things come to the fore. So I think advice here for people, ask about where do stories fit into the advertising tools that my brokerage is giving me? Or if you're on your own and you're like, look, I'm getting pitched by a certain technology company and they talk about being able to do this. Do they put my content in a stories format? Do they have that capability? What is their stance? And if they really hem and haw and they don't have a good answer, it means that frankly, their tools are a little bit rudimentary and they're not forward thinking. And the reason I bring that up is because everybody should be thinking about this. To DJ's point earlier, ESPN has stories, Spotify has stories, YouTube has stories, we have stories. It's a big, big consumer push. So again, just food for thought, tips for you. Your money is hard earned. You should put it with the right people, the right places to drive consumer outcomes. So just wanted to kind of dovetail on that really quickly. But we're showing a couple of fun examples. I'm going to kind of pass through this because again, I'm aware that we've got people on the podcast, but I think again, just look at brands that are advertising across stories. Look at what you're seeing from big brands, because usually they're the leaders. And what I mean by that is, you can follow their lead. It's always this thing of, with a cell phone, there's, democracy of content. We talked about it with Facebook Live. Just the ability to take a smartphone and produce your own video. So what I would say is, look at some of the brands that are doing stories. Look at brands that are in real estate. Some of the biggest brands are using it at scale. Think about your realtor.coms, your Zillows, among others. But then also look at other brands and think about how are they telling their story? No pun intended again, but how are they conveying that message? How are they telling it? How are you thinking about it? The other thing I think that trips people up consistently across our platforms with marketing is, think about what you want the consumer to take away from it versus I've got this listing I need to sell.
Right.
Of course. But what is it you want the consumer to take away from it? And that's where, again, I think Stories offers that really unique place, similar that we talked about with Facebook Live, to have your own voice in. It's not just a listing. You can have a listing. You should have your listing, but you can tell a much bigger story there. And DJ, I know you guys think about that a lot with what you do.
We do. And I want to also encourage everyone who has listings, and they might think, okay, well, I have 15 seconds. How do I showcase this listing? I would say focus on one cool, super interesting thing about that property and say, you guys have to see this. And assuming you have the permission, of course, of the homeowner, go in there and showcase something unique and cool and fun. And that's something that you can do every single time you have a listing, because every home has something neat about it, hopefully, or you can find something neat about it. And then you can showcase that. And that also creates fun content.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No need to boil the ocean, make it short, make it sweet. And frankly, it's a great way. One of the two examples for people on the Facebook Live right now can see there's an advertising example from Nutella, one from Orange, which is a European phone company. Both of them, if you see at the bottom of the screen, have a see more button. And when you flip that open, it opens into a Facebook or Instagram lead ad. So again, you can also use stories to do direct response. And most of the examples you see actually will do that. So start again looking at the advertising, playing with it, click that see more button, look at that. All of a sudden stories becomes a lead generation and a demand generation platform, because we have Facebook lead ads and or Instagram lead ads activated where that pre-fill is happening. So again, really great for the consumer, but there's a output you get from an agent perspective or a brokerage perspective of being able to do really great lead generation off of these experiences. It's not just for the top of the funnel branding.
Right.
Well, let's move on. Let's see what else is next. Aha! Speaking of the stages of the funnel, I couldn't have set myself up even better. It's almost like I looked at the slides before we got on the podcast. So what people are seeing on the live, and again, if you're on the podcast, is the standard purchase funnel: awareness, discovery, and purchase. And what we know is that stories inspire that action throughout the consumer journey. So it really can facilitate top to bottom of the funnel. The two prior examples, again, I would go back. If you're on the Facebook Live, watch it again, look at the learn more or see more button. If you're on the podcast, go in and start playing around and looking at the brands that are advertising. Majority of them, again, will have a see more, learn more button so that they can do lead generation. So it's a great way to drive top of the bottom funnel. 58% of people who have seen something in stories are more interested in the product after they've seen it in a story. So again, these are some studies that we've run on platforms that we're seeing stories drive business impact. It's not just a fun place to be, and that's the top of the funnel. So moving forward, 45% of respondents prefer stories after becoming aware of new trends. 37% prefer stories for learning about launches of new products or services. So again, we can think about that awareness. What's happening in your town? How do you ship community love back to people, especially after such a difficult time we've had when things start opening up? Great way to get that awareness play at the very tippity top of the funnel. So in the mid-funnel for discovery, 58% of people surveyed said they have browsed a brand's website to get more information about seeing their products and stories. So even if we don't do capturing of lead generation, I know we'll get into that all the way to the bottom of the funnel in stories, it still can drive people off-site to engage with your brand, engage with more content. Super, super important. And 38% of the people surveyed talked to somebody about a product or a service after seeing it in stories. So again, you know, DJ was talking about finding content, finding people in stories. Again, you can be there, and that generates a conversation of, wow, I saw Scott, the realtor, and he services this part of Austin, Texas. Interesting enough, I saw that he was out there talking about this brand new coffee shop, or the reopening of the dry cleaner, or the reopening of the school year, or something important to the community. It just adds a little spice to the overall marketing narrative for you. And lastly, down to purchase. 1 in 2 people surveyed said they have visited a website to buy a product as a result of seeing it in stories. So think about that. 50% of people surveyed found that they went actually to the website to actually buy a product if they weren't using a lead ad. 31% have gone to a store to buy a product or service after seeing it in stories. I know that's not as applicable for real estate, but it just again shows the power of suggestion, the power of being in stories, the power of being in an environment that has a high consumer engagement rate. And so if you, on the podcast, we have a couple of different examples, and this kind of ties back to what I said before, that stories work across any type of business. So it's not just for, you know, hip businesses or beauty or B2B. It's across all businesses, and certainly real estate fits that mode. Again, I would say look at what some of the leading brands are doing in the space. Look at what other brands are doing. You know, look for inspiration elsewhere. See what others are doing, and that can also be a great free tool for you to figure out how to do things. And then what's interesting is on our slide right now, we had a gentleman who is the VP of Marcom integration for Apple talk about creating stories. You know, we can't put a 30-second spot on Instagram. It's a whole new grammar. They think about short form creative now. And the leading creative people, even in our internal organization, we consistently are talking about how to adapt to this new format and how to perfect it. So a lot here to think about, but I think the net message is shorter, faster, better, make it fun, make it ephemeral, drive some impact. There's some things that, you know, that you should think about. Obviously, creative stickers, fun things, you know, making your own personality shine through. Ad types, again, I think the biggest thing here we talked about was with partners, making sure that their technology enables you to buy advertising across stories. They should have it. Most of the products that we've worked on and most of the brokerages tools that are offered in our guide that we stand behind have stories as an activation, because we think it's one of the most important platforms to reach consumers. Again, if you're talking to a third party, make sure that you know, do they offer stories as part of automatic placements? If you're doing it self-serve on your own, again, just make sure that, you know, do stories across all of our platforms. Don't choose one over the other. Let machine learning and algorithms take you to where consumers are spending time. And some key takeaways, again, are just, we talked about it, creative. So what type of messaging are you talking about? Ad types, I take it to mean, you know, you have stories, you have video, you have static imagery. But again, when it comes to buying, making sure that your partner, whether you're using a tool provided by your brokerage or a third party, offers stories as a platform. If you're doing it on your own, make sure you collect all three environments. A couple of tips really quick. These are much more visual. So if you're on the podcast, one of the things to just think about is a focal point. Make sure you have a focal point and you tell the consumer what you want them to do. So it could be a picture of the front of the house saying open house Saturday 2 to 4. So just make sure There's a focal point. It's something easy. Remember, these things are going at 15-second clips. So try not to make it so confusing for the consumer.
Yeah, one call to action, one message is
Yep.
is plenty, and you have time to do it. Focus on one thing.
Absolutely. Keep it simple. So ad types, let's go a little bit deeper into that. So you can try, oh, we can go back. It's
I'm
okay.
sorry. Sorry
It's
about that.
okay. No, it's fine. Go back to go forward.
Sorry. There we go.
There we are. So you can do multiple photos, and DJ talked about this. Like, find a bunch of different things in the house. Make it a carousel. Make it something that's not just one image. Tell a story, right? You take the consumer on the journey. So, you can have the beautiful outside shot. You can have the kitchen shot. You can have the deck shot. If you're out and you're trying to tell a story about your community, so let's say you don't have a listing, but you want to advertise your expertise in the neighborhood, don't just show one thing, show multiple things, show multiple restaurants, multiple coffee houses. Is there a concert in the park? So use that as just getting more and more content in front of the consumer. And then lastly, the next slide over that we're going to kind of go through is buying. You guys have heard me talk about this. It's something called automatic placements. It's absolutely key to anything you do across our platforms because, again, it meets the consumer where they are. So I talk so many different times to agents, which is hit this button, either in the tools that are offered or ask if the tools offer it. Good tools have it. You don't even need to know it. They just do it for you. Back to the partner conversation, because again, we want to find consumers no matter where they are. So, again, you don't want to make human bias and human assumption that, well, I got better performance from Instagram this time, so I should only use Instagram. Well, it could be that the house or the messaging is better suited for Facebook. Our automatic placements are machine learning. They're going to go find the consumers you want based upon the action you want them to take. So again, super important not to be, don't put yourself in a silo when you can have more places to get your message out in front of. All right. Brand marketing. No, it's okay. Same thing.
There we go.
No, it's okay. We'll keep going because I think it's the same stuff. It's really for brand marketing. It's creative. It's, again, begin with your brand. So you are your brand. You really are your brand. So again, we've talked a lot about this. Let your personality shine through. Be authentic. Make sure that you put messaging that, again, put a graphic over it with your name, with the firm you're with the hours you keep. Again, it's really important that you take that moment to brand yourself. You are the focal point of that versus maybe a more direct response environment, which is maybe much more a little bit about the listing. So super important to think about. And as we move forward, ad types should be the same. Again, we talk a lot about carousel. We talk a lot about multiple images. That's the same for your brand as it is for your direct response advertising. And even if that's you can do different pictures at different locations, tell different stories by different parts of the community, different stories for different parts of the house. I think that's an interesting phenomenon. The front of the house only tells one part of the story. Right. What is the kitchen? What is the backyard? Does it have a gym? Does it have multiple bedrooms? Does it have a sunroom? Does it have an office? All these things that you would do in telling the story of real estate, you can actually brand yourself by showing that. If you happen to be somebody who likes to be in the kitchen and talks about it, it's a personality trait. You can talk about your love of cooking and then look at this great kitchen. Wouldn't you like to be cooking in this kitchen as well?
Right.
Great way to just tell a bigger story. And then lastly, again, we buy the same way. We use those automatic placements. Let us find those consumers for you. Again, I can't overstate how that's a best practice we talk to the biggest brands in the world about. And just because you happen to be a realtor on Main Street USA doesn't mean that you shouldn't be using the same thing. What's good for Nike and their advertising, what's efficient, will probably work for you too. So just know that this is a big one. Ask those questions. Again, if those partners are saying they know Facebook and Instagram, ask what your stories are. What do you do for stories? And do you do automatic placements? And again, if you get a lot of, I'm kind of staring blankly into the camera for the live stream, or a lot of, oh, what?
So,
then you know the answer.
So I have my own very, very short automatic placement story. So I do the advertising for our company when we're out recruiting, looking for agents to join us. And I didn't use automatic placement with my Facebook ads for a very long time because I thought I knew better, and I wasn't sure. I thought I know the right time and exactly when to serve up these ads and who to serve them to and how to serve them in the most effective way. And I was absolutely wrong. And I've switched to automatic placements about 2 years ago. And not only did my engagement increase significantly, but my cost went down because
Yes.
Facebook wants you to be successful with their advertising platform, or else you're not going to continue to use it, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So they have created these tools in a way to make everything more efficient, more effective, to benefit not only the end user, but also you as well as the business owner. So I couldn't be a bigger fan of the automatic placement, and it makes my job as the marketer a heck of a lot easier, which I
Absolutely.
appreciate.
And it's guesswork, right? I mean, so much of what we think we know, sometimes we don't. And you can
Right.
do this for years and years and years. So, really quick, as we start to wrap up, 4 million businesses use stories ads each and every month. Just to give that reference, we have about 9 million businesses using our tools and our platforms, about 9 million advertisers. So, again, that should show you we've got a lot of open green space to do a lot more in stories. And as an industry, I think we can do much more by it. And it's a great opportunity. DJ just mentioned it, efficiency. How, can we drive a more efficient, a cheaper outcome for your business? I mean, that's a huge goal of ours. And if you can get proficient at stories, that's one output that you get from being in that environment. And moving ahead, it's the end slide. Stories can do it. Again, I really encourage you, if you're on live and you're watching this, go back, watch some of the creative examples. The best thing you can do, and even if you're on the podcast versus the Facebook Live, is get in the environment, play with it, look, spend time using, swipe, see different brands, see things that you've seen from brands you like, you follow, sponsored content, which is obviously paid. Are you seeing small businesses use this both for paid and organic? Well, it's a huge laboratory that you, just by using this device, can actually do your own field research. The last thing I would say before we, kind of conclude with the slide portion, and if you're on the podcast, is again, really be thoughtful about the fact that this is where your consumer is. These platforms, stories, again, I said it earlier, ESPN, other places, it's becoming core to how the consumers, take content on their mobile phone. So it's not I'll eventually learn it moment. Learn it, get to know it. Doing it will have an instant benefit for your business, and it will have a benefit both organically as well as on the paid side. So it's not just one or the other. They really sing and hum together. And lastly, again, I've said it a couple of times over the last hour or so, but this is really where you can shine through and show yourself as your own brand, as your own expertise. It's not just about the static listing photo. It really allows you to come alive and tell your story. Again, no pun intended, but that's how a consumer can really get to know you better. So even if you feel like that photo of the house isn't great, well, you know what? Take your phone, go down to Main Street, go talk about to business owners, talk about things you're seeing in your community. Great format, experiment, see what lands for you. But net messaging is really get proficient at this. It's going to be a game changer for you.
Yeah, it's quick, it's easy, and it's a way to demonstrate your values to your consumers. This is what brands do, and you're a brand. A real estate agent is an individual brand. If you're on a team, you have a team brand. If you work for a company with a brand, you're part of their brand as well. But Facebook stories and Instagram stories are a way to demonstrate your brand. And so maybe write down your values, and then write down what are those values that you want your clients to know about, or your prospective clients, and then think about creating content around that. So if generosity is an important value to you, you want to make sure that people know that you are generous. Now, there's ways to do that are subtle and not subtle, but look through Instagram stories and Facebook stories and see how people are showcasing those values. See what works, what doesn't work, what you like and what you don't like, and then start to experiment with it. You can create this content quick. It's easy. It doesn't live forever either. So if you do something and it doesn't get a great response, oh well, it's gone. You move on to the next one. And I think there's so much of an opportunity here to really showcase who you are as an individual, and not just the brand you are, but what are the values behind you? What are you doing? You don't have to give up all of your privacy to do this either. This doesn't have to be come lounge with me at 8 o'clock at night in my living room. This is, here's what I'm all about. And you can showcase that throughout the day. It's quick, it's simple. I'm a big fan. So I'm going to actually start to use it ourselves. You've inspired me to do it with our own marketing efforts, and I'm embarrassed to say I'm not doing it. So I'm going to be doing this as well. So I want to thank Scott for being on the podcast today. We appreciate his input. He is a trusted partner. We love Scott and everyone at the Facebook team with respect to real estate. And we will see everyone on the next episode. And thank you, Scott.